This is a series of video lectures on service tax published by Taxman. In this lecture, we are going to see issues relating to reverse charge in service tax. Reverse charge is also termed as tax shift. Normally, service tax is payable by a person who is providing the service. However, Section 68(2) of Finance Act 1994 makes provision for reverse charge, that is, making person receiving the service liable to pay the service tax. Thus, in reverse charge, instead of the person providing the service, the person receiving the service is made liable to pay the service tax. The section also provides that the provision can be made in notification that part of tax will be paid by the service provider and part of tax may be paid by the service receiver. Both types of permutations and combinations are permissible. Now, these are some issues relating to reverse charge. First issue to be noted is that small service provider exemption of rupees 10 lakhs is not available when tax is payable under reverse charge. That means the service receiver who is liable to pay the service tax cannot enjoy the exemption of rupees 10 lakhs. Thus, where he is liable to pay the service tax and the value of service is hardly 10,000 or 20,000, even then he will be liable to pay the service tax. Next issue to be remembered, that whenever service tax is payable under reverse charge mechanism, it has to be paid by cash only, that is GAR 7 challan only. You may be having Cenvat Credit to your credit, but that credit cannot be utilized for payment of service tax when the liability to pay tax is on the service receiver. However, once the service receiver pays the tax, then he can avail the Cenvat Credit of service tax paid by him. Of course, it is subject to the condition that is his input service and it falls within the definition of input eligible service. And if so, he can take Cenvat Credit on the basis of GAR 7 challan, under which he had paid the service tax under reverse charge mechanism. Now, the service provider, he has to reckon invoice. Now, suppose he is not liable to pay service tax at all, then obviously his bill will not show any service tax. But in case of some services like works contract service and manpower supply service, the service provider is required to pay part of the service tax and service receiver is required to pay the balance portion of service tax. In such cases, the invoice of service provider should contain only details of his part of service tax. For example, under works contract service, he is liable to pay service tax only on 50%. Then his invoice should show only 50% as service tax and not the entire amount. The service receiver should pay the service tax of his part, either 100%, 75% or 50% as applicable to that particular service by GAR 7 challan. Now, service receiver is liable for only his part of the amount. For example, the service receiver, the service provider may be enjoying exemption under service tax, and then he may not charge any service tax in his invoice. However, even in such cases, the service receiver is liable to pay service tax on his portion only and not an entire portion. So, in case of works contract service, suppose the service provider does not charge any tax in his invoice, even then service receiver is liable to pay only 50%. Of course, in the cases where service receiver is liable to pay 100% of the tax, then this issue does not arise. Now, in some case services, for example, goods transport of agency services and renting of motor vehicle designed to carry passengers, the partial abatement is subject to condition of non-availment of Cenvat Credit by service provider. It is interesting that the service tax is payable by the service receiver, but the non-availment of Cenvat Credit has to be fulfilled by the service provider. Now, in such cases where the abatement is subject to the condition of non-availment of Cenvat Credit and where the liability of service tax is on the service receiver, the service receiver should obtain a certificate from the service provider that he has not availed the Cenvat Credit. Now, in case of GTA, such certificate may be obtained on his consignment note itself, or it may be obtained separately. In case of renting of motor vehicles designed to carry passengers, such certificate may be obtained on his invoice, or a separate certificate may be obtained, say monthly or quarterly or half yearly, depending on the nature or the volume of transactions. However, if such a certificate is not obtained, then the service receiver may be held liable to pay service tax on entire amount in case of GTA services. In case of renting of motor vehicle designed to carry passengers, the service receiver is liable to pay service tax only on abatement amount, that is only on 40% of the value, whether or not he obtains such a certificate. However, to be on safe side, it is advisable to obtain such a certificate from the service provider. Now, we will see the various situations and various services where the service receiver is liable to pay the service tax. In cases of such services, in some cases, the business entity is liable to pay service tax if it is a service receiver. In some cases, business entity, which is a body corporate, is liable to pay the service tax under reverse charge. Hence, it is necessary to understand the meaning of business entity and a body corporate. Now, business entity means any person ordinarily carrying out any activity relating to industry, commerce, or any other business or profession. So, business entity may be any person. It may be individual, HUF, partnership firm, company, other body corporate, government, etc. But it cannot be government, because a government is not a business entity. A charity organization not undertaking any business is not a business entity. In some cases, the reverse charge applies only when the service receiver is a body corporate. Now, body corporate is a broad term. It includes company, LLP, cooperative society. These are all body corporates. Even government actually is a body corporate. But firm, HUF, trust, individual is not a body corporate because it is not registered or it is not incorporated under any law. Even society is legally not a body corporate, though cooperative society is legally a body corporate. Now, let us see various situations where reverse charge mechanism applies. The first situation is in case of works contract service. If a service provider is providing works contract service, then the service receiver is liable to pay service tax on 50% of the amount when service provider of works contract is individual, HUF, proprietary or partnership firm or association of persons, and service receiver is company or business entity incorporated as a body corporate. Now, companies are liable even if it is not a business entity, but other body corporates are liable only if it is a business entity. In such cases, the 50% of the tax is payable by the service provider. It may be noted that if the service provider itself is a body corporate or a company, then the service provider is liable to pay 100% service tax, and then there is no question of any reverse charge mechanism, and in that case the service receiver will not be liable to pay any service tax. Now, works contract service covers not only construction, but it can cover even job work or annual maintenance contracts, because the definition of works contract covers work relating to both movable as well as immovable property. But this provision of reverse charge applies only when the service provider is liable to pay tax, that is VAT, under works contract. If his service is not coming under works contract tax, then this reverse charge mechanism is not applicable. The second service where reverse charge mechanism applies is manpower supply service. Now, in case of manpower supply service, the service receiver is liable to pay service tax on 75% of the amount if service provider of manpower supply is individual, HUF, proprietary or partnership firm or AOP. If the service provider is company or a body corporate, then this reverse charge mechanism does not apply. Further, this reverse charge mechanism applies also when service receiver is company or business entity incorporated as a body corporate. Now, for example, government is not a business entity. So, when there is service tax of manpower supply, service of manpower supply provided to government, then this reverse charge mechanism will not apply, and the service provider will be liable to pay service tax on 100% of the amount. Now, where the service receiver is liable to pay the service tax, then he is liable to pay on 75% amount, and balance 25% is payable by the service provider. The invoice of service provider in such case should contain only 25% of the tax. His invoice should not show 100% tax. It may be noted that in case of manpower supply service, service tax is payable on salary of the person, any other expenses like ESI or Provident Fund which is paid for that person, and also if the labor contractor charges his service charge or his commission, on that commission also. Thus, in case of manpower supply, service tax is payable on the salary of the labor plus ESI, Provident Fund and other payments which are made on behalf of that person, plus service charges of that labor contractor, and bill should contain this entire amount. Now, the first issue relating to manpower is that service should be a manpower supply service. The basic principle of manpower is that the labor contractor or whosoever is there, he brings the person and then he works under the command of the principal employer. Then only it is a manpower supply service. Thus, a security service or a cleaning service or a piece basis or job basis contract is not a manpower supply service, because in that case the person doesn't work under the control or command of the principal employer. Hence, it is advisable to ensure that contract is properly drafted to indicate that it is not a manpower supply service. For example, if a contract with security agency provides that he will make arrangement for 10 security guards, that itself does not mean that he has agreed to 10 persons as manpower supplier and then they will work under the control of the principal employer. The 10 people which he is mentioned is only to specify what service he is going to provide. In any case, it is advisable to make proper agreement so that the disputes are avoided. As I said, service tax is payable on salary plus Provident Fund plus ESI plus commission of labor contractor plus any other payments that may be made to the person or the labor. Now, though it is called a manpower supply service, it is not that only ordinary labor will be supplied under these provisions. Even a senior manager deputed by a company to its subsidiary company or to its group company will fall in this definition. Thus, if one company deputes a person to another group company and his salary is debited to such other company, it will fall in the definition of manpower supply service, and then service tax will become payable. Of course, if both are companies, then the issue of reverse charge will not apply, but issue of service tax will surely apply. Another mechanism of reverse charge is in case of renting of motor vehicle designed to carry passengers. Now, in these cases, reverse charge is applicable when renting is to a person who is not in similar line of business. Thus, if a person who is in the business of renting car gives the vehicle on rent to a person who is also in the business of renting of a car, then this reverse charge mechanism does not apply. Of course, this is a relief, because in many cases the rent-a-cab service provider may not have his own vehicle, and then he will offload part of his work to another person who is providing the service of renting of a motor vehicle. In that case, the first service provider of renting of motor vehicle provides service to the another person who is providing service of motor vehicle to carry passengers, and then he is providing service to the final customer. Now, when the first person who is renting a cab gives the cab on rent to another person who is also in the business of renting a cab, then this reverse charge mechanism does not apply. Now, this reverse charge mechanism applies only when the service provider is HUF, individual or firm. That means if the service provider is a body corporate or a company, then this reverse charge mechanism does not apply. And the service receiver should be a business entity registered as a body corporate. That means all business and all service receivers are not liable. In fact, even all business entities who are receiving the service are not liable. Only business entities who are registered as a body corporate are liable. A little while ago, we discussed what is meant by a business entity and what is meant by a body corporate. Now, when the service receiver is liable to pay the service tax, he is liable to pay service tax on 40% of the bill of the service provider. The condition is that the service provider should not have availed the Cenvat credit. Now, really this condition is meaningless, because whether he avails the Cenvat credit or whether he does not avail the Cenvat credit, the service receiver is liable to pay service tax only on 40% of the amount. But the wording of the notification is slightly confusing, and hence it is advisable to obtain a certificate from the service provider that he has not availed any Cenvat credit. In fact, if he avails the Cenvat credit, he is liable to pay service tax on balance 60%, and service receiver is liable in all the cases to pay service tax only on 40% of the amount. Now, the service tax paid on renting of a motor vehicle designed to carry passengers is unfortunately not eligible for Cenvat credit in most of the situations. In many of the situations, service tax paid on renting of a motor vehicle is not allowed as a Cenvat credit, except when few cases like insurance companies or motor vehicle manufacturers, etc. Hence, in such cases, this 40% tax actually becomes a tax or cost to the company, because the service receiver cannot avail the Cenvat credit. Now, in many companies, it is found that cars are taken on rent from wife, and then they are given to husband as a perquisite. Now, this is done as a tax planning exercise. If such tax planning exercise is done, then the company will be liable to pay service tax on the rent which they are paying to the wife of the employee, because then it becomes a renting of motor vehicle designed to carry passengers, and that renting is given by an individual to a company. So, this tax planning will result in slightly increased cost burden to the company. Next service where reverse charge mechanism applies is goods transport agency. Now this tax is in existence in reverse charge since 2005, and many of these issues are well settled. Even then, in borderline cases or in many situations, disputes are still going on. Legally, service tax is on GTA and not on GTO. That is, persons who are providing only goods transport services, that is, goods transport operators, then there is no question of any reverse charge because they do not issue any consignment note. The question of reverse charge applies only in case of GTA, that is, when they issue a consignment note, and in the words of finance ministers, the service tax is on booking agents. Now, this goods transport agency is most of the cases not liable to pay service tax. It is liable only when both service provider and service receiver are individuals. In most of other cases, tax is payable by the consignor or consignee who is paying the freight. Now, service tax is payable only on 25% of the amount if the goods transport agency does not avail the Cenvat credit. So, the service receiver who is liable to pay the service tax should obtain a certificate from GTA either on the consignment note or a bill or a separate letter that he has not availed any Cenvat credit. If you fail to obtain such a certificate, you may be liable to pay service tax on entire 100% of the amount. In fact, this condition was there up to 2008, but was removed in 2008 due to impracticability of this provision. But now this has been reintroduced with effect from 1st July 2012. Now this is an exercise in futility because actually if you see the definition of output service, GTA service has been specifically excluded from the definition of output service. Thus, the GTA service is not at all eligible for Cenvat credit, and the goods transport agency, even if it wants to, it cannot avail the Cenvat credit in view of the specific definition in Cenvat credit rules. However, this meaningless and harassment prone provision has been introduced and all assessees have to live with it. Another service which is under reverse charge is support services which are provided by government or local authority. Now, services provided by government can be broadly classified as sovereign and statutory activities and non-statutory activities. Now, the sovereign and statutory activities which are provided by done by the government, they are not subject to service tax, and on such levies and on such fees, service tax is not payable. For example, boiler testing, factory inspector charges, ESI charges, these are all statutory activities done under a statute, and on that service tax is not payable. However, there are other services which are not statutory, which are provided either by a government or a local authority. These are in the nature of support services. These are like testing, of course non-statutory testing, police protection, advertisement, construction, outsourcing type, that is BPO type services provided by government to business entity. If a business entity gets such type of services from the government, then business entity will be liable for the entire service tax. Definition of business entity we have already seen. Then there are some other services which are coming under reverse charge. Out of them, one is insurance agent. In case of insurance agent, the insurance company which is availing the services of insurance agent is liable to pay the service tax. In case of services of individual advocate or a firms of advocates or arbitral tribunal to business entity having turnover over rupees 10 lakhs, then that business entity which is receiving the legal services is liable to pay the service tax. Of course, this provision applies only to legal services, not other services, if any. Next, a service which is subject to reverse charge is sponsorship. Now, many body corporates or partnership firms sponsor some event. Of course, if it is a recognized sports event, then it is exempt. But in case of other events, it may be a commercial event, it may be an entertainment event, or it may be a similar event which is not a recognized sports event, even IPL. In such cases, the body corporate or the partnership which is paying the tax, actually it is paying tax means it is paying the sponsorship fee. It is paying the sponsorship fee itself means it is receiving the sponsorship services, and the body corporate or partnership firm which is paying the sponsorship fees is the service receiver, and then it is liable to pay the service tax. The next service which is subject to reverse charge is import of service. Now, import of service broadly means a service provider is outside the taxable territory and service receiver is within the taxable territory. In such cases, the service receiver who is within the taxable territory will be subject to pay service tax on the entire amount of the bill. Now, what is import of service? That will be decided on the basis of place of provision of service rules. In case of import of service, there is one more debate or one more argument or one more complication is whether in case of import of services where the service receiver is liable to pay the service tax, whether the service tax is payable on net amount or net amount plus TDS, because in case of import of services, in many cases the service receiver is liable to deduct tax and source even under DTA agreement or even otherwise and pay it to government. Now let us say he is paying 90 rupees to the foreign service provider and he is paying 10 rupees as TDS. Then whether he should pay service tax on 90 rupees or 100 rupees. In my view, service tax is payable on 100 rupees because the foreign service provider who is maybe under DTA can avail the credit of TDS which is paid by the service receiver. Another issue is this 100 rupees should be taken as inclusive of service tax or exclusive of service tax. This again is a arguable and debatable issue, but in my view this 100 rupees should be taken as net amount and service tax should be calculated on 100 rupees and not by making back calculations. The reason for my view is that actually the liability of the service tax is of service provider, and only because he is outside India, the service receiver is being made liable to pay service tax. If the service provider would have normally raised an invoice, he would have raised the invoice of 100 plus 12.36, that is 112.36. But since he is not liable, he is raising invoice of only 100, and that is why balance 12.36% should be payable by the service receiver. However, I agree that the issue is debatable. Thank you very much. Here we are concluding the issue relating to reverse charge on service tax. Thank you.